Isaac Newton is the most celebrated scientist in the history of Western civilization. The laws of motion, the theory of universal gravitation, the invention of calculus, the first rigorous mathematical description of the physical universe. These achievements, accomplished largely in a single extraordinary decade of the 1660s, established Newton as, in the words of his contemporary Alexander Pope, the man whom nature and nature's laws had been waiting for. And yet, in the 300 years since his death, something extraordinary about Isaac Newton has been almost completely hidden from the public understanding of who he actually was. Newton spent more time, vastly more time, on a different investigation than on the physics for which he is remembered. An investigation that his scientific admirers have found deeply embarrassing. An investigation that was deliberately concealed from public knowledge for centuries after his death. An investigation that, when the full extent of it was finally revealed in the 20th century, caused the economist John Maynard Keynes, who had purchased Newton's private papers at auction, to make a statement that shocked the academic world. Keynes said Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians, the last of those who saw the universe as a living mystery to be decoded, not through experiment alone, but through the patient, rigorous, lifelong decipherment of a text that Newton believed contained, hidden within its words and numbers and symbolic structures, the complete blueprint of reality. That text was the Bible. And Newton spent 30 years studying its hidden code, not as a believer reading scripture for spiritual comfort, not as a theologian examining doctrine, as a scientist, with the same obsessive precision, the same mathematical rigor, the same conviction that the universe operated according to discoverable laws, applied not to the motion of planets, but to the hidden structure of the most sacred text in Western civilization. Tonight we are going to look at what Newton found and at what his 30 years of investigation reveals about the nature of reality and about the ancient wisdom that was encoded in the text he spent his life deciphering. To understand what Newton was doing in his secret investigation, we need to understand what he believed about the nature of the Bible. Newton was not a conventional Christian. His private theological views, which he carefully concealed throughout his life, knowing that they would have destroyed his career and possibly endangered his life, were, by the standards of 17th century England, deeply heterodox. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. He did not believe that Jesus was divine in the orthodox sense. He was, in the technical theological term, an Arian, a position that had been declared heretical since the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. But Newton's heterodoxy went much deeper than a disagreement about the nature of Christ. Newton believed that the Bible, and particularly the prophetic books, especially Daniel and Revelation, contained a precise mathematical code, a system of symbolic language that, when correctly interpreted, described the complete structure of history from its beginning to its end, a divine blueprint that had been deliberately encoded by its author, God, in a form that could only be decoded by someone with the mathematical and symbolic intelligence to see through the surface of the text to the underlying structure. Newton spent 30 years trying to be that person. He produced more than 4 million words of manuscript on biblical prophecy, more than he wrote on mathematics and physics combined. These manuscripts were suppressed after his death, hidden from public knowledge for centuries, until Keynes purchased them at auction in 1936 and recognised their extraordinary significance. What Newton found in the biblical code was not what most people would expect. He found a precise chronological system, a set of symbolic periods and cycles that he believed described the actual dates of historical events, past and future. He found a symbolic geography, a map of the spiritual structure of the cosmos encoded in the architecture of the Temple of Solomon, which Newton studied obsessively and about which he wrote extensively. And he found something that pointed again and again toward a recognition that the ancient world had expressed in many different forms, that the universe is not a machine, that it is a text, a communication from a mind that is not human, expressed in a language that is not ordinary language, addressed to human beings who have the capacity, with sufficient patience, sufficient intelligence, and sufficient dedication to read it. This was Newton's deepest conviction, and it connects his hidden investigation directly to some of the most ancient wisdom traditions that have ever existed. The idea that the universe is a text, that reality has a hidden structure that can be decoded by those with the knowledge and the dedication to read it, is not unique to Newton. It is one of the oldest and most persistent ideas in the history of human thought. The Kabbalistic tradition of Jewish mysticism, one of the most sophisticated symbolic systems ever developed, is built entirely on this premise. The Torah, in the Kabbalistic understanding, is not simply a historical narrative or a moral code. It is a precise encoding of the structure of reality itself. Every letter, every word, every numerical value, every structural pattern in the text corresponds to an aspect of the divine reality that underlies all of existence. The Kabbalists developed elaborate methods, gematria, notarikon, temera, for reading the hidden dimensions of the text, not as arbitrary games with letters and numbers, but as technologies for perceiving aspects of reality that are invisible to ordinary reading. The Hermetic tradition, which Newton studied extensively and which deeply influenced his approach to natural philosophy, held a similar conviction about the universe itself. The fundamental Hermetic principle attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage who was identified with the Egyptian god Thoth, is that the universe is structured according to a system of correspondences. As above, so below. As within, so without. The same patterns that appear at the largest scale of reality appear at the smallest. The same laws that govern the motion of planets govern the motion of atoms. The same symbolic structures that appear in sacred texts appear in the structure of the natural world. Newton was steeped in this tradition. His alchemical work, another vast body of secret manuscript that was hidden after his death, drew directly on the Hermetic understanding that the transformation of matter and the transformation of consciousness were governed by the same underlying principles. And the ancient Egyptian tradition, which Newton studied through the Hermetic texts that claimed to derive from it, understood the universe as a living communication. The hieroglyphs were not merely a writing system. They were understood as a direct encoding of the divine intelligence that permeated all of reality. The word, the hieroglyph, was not a symbol for a thing. It was a participation in the thing itself. Newton, in his 30 years of biblical investigation, was working in this tradition. He was not a modern scientist applying rigorous methods to an ancient text. He was a magician in the original pre-pejorative sense of the word, a practitioner of the ancient art of reading the hidden structure of reality through its encoded expressions in sacred language and sacred geometry. And what he found, when his investigation is read carefully in the context of the ancient traditions that informed it, points towards something that the modern world has not yet fully assimilated. Let us now look at what Newton actually found in his 30 years of biblical investigation and why it matters. The most extensive body of Newton's secret manuscripts concerns the prophecies of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Newton believed that these texts contained a precise symbolic system for understanding the structure of history, not merely as a sequence of events, but as the unfolding of a divine plan that had been encoded in the text from the beginning. He developed an elaborate interpretation of the prophetic symbolism, assigning specific historical meanings to the beasts, the numbers, the periods, and the architectural imagery that appear in these texts. Some of Newton's specific interpretations were wrong. He made predictions about the timeline of historical events that did not occur as he expected, and the details of his prophetic interpretation are from the perspective of modern scholarship, of limited historical value, but the underlying conviction that drove the investigation is extraordinarily significant. Newton believed that the universe has a teleology, a direction, a purpose, that history is not a random sequence of events, but an unfolding of something that was intended from the beginning, and that the most advanced human intelligence, applied with sufficient rigor and dedication to the right texts, could perceive the structure of that intention. This conviction, which Newton shared with the Kabbalistic tradition, with the Hermetic tradition, with the ancient Egyptian understanding of the universe as a living communication, stands in radical contrast to the picture of reality that the scientific tradition Newton founded eventually produced. The modern scientific picture of the universe, the picture that Newton's physics extended and developed by subsequent generations, has given us, is a universe without inherent purpose, without direction, without a telos, a universe of matter and energy moving according to mathematical laws that are indifferent to human meaning, human experience, and human aspiration. Newton did not believe in this universe. He believed, with a conviction that he never abandoned, that he pursued obsessively until the end of his life, that the universe was saturated with intention, that the mathematical laws he had discovered in his physics were not cold, indifferent mechanisms, but the language of a mind, a divine intelligence that had structured reality according to principles that could be discovered, that communicated those principles through sacred texts and sacred geometry, and that had purposes that extended beyond anything ordinary human knowledge had yet grasped. This is why Keynes called him the last of the magicians, not because Newton was primitive or superstitious, but because Newton stood at the boundary between two worlds, between the ancient understanding of reality as a living communication from a divine intelligence and the modern understanding of reality as a mechanism governed by indifferent laws. And Newton, privately, secretly, in the millions of words of manuscript that he never published and that were hidden after his death, refused to accept the modern picture. He kept looking for the divine intelligence behind the mechanism. And what he found in 30 years of investigation is what the ancient traditions had always said was there. Now we need to look at something that connects Newton's secret investigation to a much broader question. The question of whether the universe has a hidden structure that can be read. Because this question, which Newton pursued through biblical prophecy and the Hermetic tradition, is one that has been asked in different forms by virtually every sophisticated intellectual tradition in human history. The ancient Egyptians understood the universe as a text written in hieroglyphs, not merely the human hieroglyphs carved on temple walls, but the hieroglyphs of the natural world itself. The movements of stars, the flooding of the Nile, the cycles of the seasons, the patterns of animal behavior, all of these were understood as communications from the divine intelligence that permeated all of reality, readable by those who had been trained to read them. The Vedic tradition of ancient India developed the most elaborate system of cosmic correspondences ever created. The Vedic seers understood the structure of the cosmos as a precise reflection of the structure of consciousness, and vice versa. The macrocosm and the microcosm were not separate realities, but two expressions of the same underlying pattern. Understanding the nature of consciousness was understanding the nature of the cosmos. Understanding the nature of the cosmos was understanding the nature of consciousness. The Pythagorean tradition of ancient Greece, which Newton studied extensively, held that the universe was structured according to mathematical harmonies, that the ratios that produce musical consonants also governed the proportions of the cosmos, that the same mathematical relationships that appeared in geometry appeared in music, in astronomy, in the proportions of the human body, in the structure of the soul. Number, in the Pythagorean understanding, was not a human invention. It was the language of the divine intelligence that had structured reality, and Newton, who discovered that the motion of planets obeyed precise mathematical laws, who found that the same mathematical relationships appeared at every scale of physical reality, from the falling of apples to the orbits of moons, was, in his physics, as much as in his biblical investigation, finding the same thing. The universe is written in mathematical language. Galileo, Newton's great predecessor, had said this explicitly. He wrote that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics, and its characters are triangles, circles, and other geometric figures without which it is impossible to understand a single word of it. This is precisely what the Pythagoreans had said 2,000 years before Galileo. It is what the Hermetic tradition had said. It is what Newton found in his 30 years of biblical investigation. The universe has a hidden structure. That structure can be read, and the reading, whether it is done through the mathematics of physics, or through the symbolic interpretation of sacred texts, or through the direct inner investigation of the nature of consciousness, reveals the same underlying reality, a reality that is not random, not indifferent, not a mechanism running without a purpose, but a communication from a mind that is not limited to human scale, expressed in every language simultaneously, in mathematics, in symbolic prophecy, in sacred geometry, in the structure of consciousness itself. Newton spent 30 years trying to read it in one language. The ancient traditions had been reading it in all of them simultaneously. At this point, something needs to be said directly, because the picture we have been building of Newton as a secret magician, of the universe as a divine communication, of the ancient traditions as sophisticated readers of a hidden cosmic text, might seem to be leading toward a conclusion that is at odds with what genuine intellectual rigor requires. It might seem to be leading toward the conclusion that the universe is designed, that there is a God, that the religious and mystical traditions were right, and the scientific tradition is somehow incomplete or mistaken. This is not the conclusion we are drawing. The genuine conclusion is more subtle and more interesting than that. What Newton's secret investigation reveals, when it is placed alongside the ancient traditions that informed it and the modern physics that his public work helped to create, is that the question of whether the universe has a hidden structure that can be read is not a religious question. It is an empirical question, and the evidence from every direction in which it has been seriously investigated points in the same direction. The universe does have a hidden structure. Mathematical physics has demonstrated this beyond any reasonable doubt. The same mathematical relationships appear at every scale of physical reality. The same equations that describe the behavior of subatomic particles describe the behavior of galaxies. The same symmetries that appear in the structure of crystals appear in the structure of the laws of physics themselves. This is not what you would expect if the universe were random, if the laws of physics were arbitrary, if the appearance of mathematical structure were merely a human projection onto an inherently chaotic reality. It is what you would expect if the universe had, as Newton believed, an underlying order, a hidden structure, a blueprint. The ancient traditions went further than modern physics has been willing to go. They said not only that the universe has a mathematical structure, but that this mathematical structure is the expression of a consciousness, of an awareness that is the ground of reality, not a late arriving product of it. Whether this further claim is correct, whether the universe is not merely structured, but also, in some sense, aware, is the deepest question in contemporary philosophy of mind and consciousness studies. It is the question that the convergence between ancient wisdom and modern science is, from multiple directions, beginning to press more urgently than ever before. And Newton, standing at the boundary between the ancient world and the modern, secretly pursuing in his biblical investigations what his physics could only approach from the outside, was asking this question before almost anyone else in the modern West understood that it needed to be asked. If you have followed this conversation from Newton's secret manuscripts to the Kabbalistic tradition, from the Hermetic principle of correspondence to the Pythagorean understanding of mathematical harmony, from the Egyptian hieroglyphs of the natural world to the modern physics that Newton's public work helped to create, then you have been in contact with something that deserves to be held for a moment before we close. The idea that the universe has a hidden structure that can be read is not merely an interesting historical claim about what Newton believed. It is a claim about your relationship to reality. Because if the universe is, as Newton believed, as the Kabbalists mapped, as the Hermetic tradition asserted, as the Pythagoreans demonstrated in mathematics and music, structured according to principles that are not arbitrary, not random, not indifferent to human consciousness, then the experience of your life is not happening in a universe that does not care. It is happening in a universe that is, in some sense, that we do not yet fully understand, communicating, not through miraculous interventions or supernatural events, through the structure of reality itself, through the mathematical relationships that appear at every scale of physical existence, through the patterns of synchronicity and meaning that people who pay close attention to their experience consistently report, through the resonance between the structure of consciousness and the structure of the cosmos that every genuine contemplative tradition has described from its own angle. Newton spent 30 years reading this communication in the language of biblical prophecy. The Kabbalists read it in the structure of the Hebrew alphabet. The Pythagoreans read it in the harmony of number. The Egyptian priests read it in the movements of stars and the flooding of rivers. The Vedic seers read it in the structure of consciousness itself. And the modern physicist, working with instruments of extraordinary precision and mathematics of extraordinary power, reads it in the equations that describe the behavior of reality from the quantum scale to the cosmic scale. They are all reading the same text in different languages, from different angles, with different methods, but pointing toward the same recognition that the universe is not a machine running without a purpose in an empty void. It is something more like a mind expressing itself in the only language available to it, the language of reality itself. At Sacred Flame, this is the recognition we exist to support. Subscribe if this matters to you, and share this with someone who has always suspected that the universe is more than what the conventional picture describes. Someone who has felt, in moments of unusual clarity or unusual difficulty, that something more than random chance is at work in the structure of their experience. They are not wrong. And Newton, the greatest scientist in the history of Western civilization, spent 30 years of his secret life trying to prove it. We began tonight with Isaac Newton, celebrated as the father of modern science, the man who gave us the laws of motion and universal gravitation and the mathematical description of the physical universe. And we revealed something that has been hidden for 3 centuries, that Newton spent more time, vastly more time, on a different investigation, an investigation that his scientific admirers concealed after his death. An investigation that, when finally revealed in the 20th century, caused Keynes to say that Newton was not the first of the age of reason, but the last of the magicians. What Newton was investigating in 30 years of secret manuscript was the hidden code of the Bible. And what he believed he was finding, encoded in the symbolic language of the prophetic books, in the mathematical proportions of the Temple of Solomon, in the numerical structures of the sacred text, was the blueprint of reality, the hidden structure of the universe, expressed in a language that required the full power of the greatest mathematical mind of the age to begin to decode. Newton was wrong about some of the specifics. His prophetic timelines did not unfold as he expected. The hidden code of the Bible has not yielded to any subsequent investigator the kind of precise historical predictions he was looking for. But he was right about something more fundamental. The universe has a hidden structure This is not a religious claim. It is not a mystical assertion. It is the central finding of 300 years of physics, built on the foundation Newton himself laid. The universe is mathematical. Its laws are the same everywhere. The same relationships appear at every scale. The same symmetries govern the behavior of quarks and the behavior of galaxies. The universe is, in the precise, technical, scientific sense of the word, structured. And Newton's conviction that this structure was not the product of chance, that it was the expression of a mind, a divine intelligence, an organizing principle that was not indifferent to human consciousness, is a conviction that the ancient traditions had held for thousands of years before him. The Kabbalists called the hidden structure of reality the tree of life. The Pythagoreans called it the harmony of the spheres. The Hermetic tradition called it the principle of correspondence. The Egyptian tradition called it Ma'at, the cosmic order that pervaded all of reality. The Vedic tradition called it Artha, the universal law that governed both the cosmos and consciousness. Newton called it the code, and he spent 30 years trying to crack it. He did not succeed, not in the way he hoped. But the search itself, the conviction that the universe is not random, not indifferent, not a mechanism without a purpose, is a search that every genuine wisdom tradition in human history has shared. And it is a search that, in our time, the convergence between ancient wisdom and modern science is making more urgent and more promising than at any previous moment. The code is real. Newton knew it. The ancient traditions knew it first. And the investigation, from the inside through consciousness and from the outside through physics, continues. Until next time, stay awake.